This marriage was scarier than any thriller. The husband turned a fridge into a chamber of hell, a missing wife, a locked freezer, and a husband who kept acting strangely calm while police searched the house. At first, it sounded like another domestic disappearance case. But then, investigators opened a refrigerator that should never have been there, and uncovered something so horrifying. Even experienced detectives struggled to speak about it afterward. What looked like an ordinary marriage was hiding secrets darker than any psychological thriller. And the deeper police dug into this couple's life, the more terrifying the truth became. Neighbors thought they were just another married couple trying to survive life together. No loud fights, no obvious warning signs. But behind closed doors, their relationship was quietly rotting into something deeply disturbing. Then one day, the wife vanished without a trace, and her husband's story kept changing. Small details stopped making sense. His behavior became impossible to ignore. And soon investigators realized they weren't dealing with a normal missing persons case anymore. Because inside that house was evidence of a nightmare nobody saw coming. When police first arrived at the house, nothing looked unusual. No broken windows, no signs of forced entry, no blood on the walls. Just a husband calmly explaining that his wife had left. But experienced detectives know something most people don't. The scariest crime scenes are often the quietest ones. And this house was far too quiet. The couple at the center of this case had been married for years. To outsiders, they looked ordinary. They went shopping together, talked to neighbors, lived what seemed like a normal life. But behind closed doors, the marriage had been deteriorating slowly and violently. Friends would later describe the relationship as tense, controlling, and emotionally exhausting. Arguments were becoming more frequent. The wife had reportedly grown distant. Some people close to her even claimed she looked afraid during the final weeks before she disappeared. But nobody imagined how dark things had truly become inside that home. Then one day, she vanished. No calls, no messages, no activity. It was like she had simply stopped existing. At first, the husband acted concerned. He told people she had left after an argument, said she needed space. He repeated the story calmly and confidently, almost too confidently. But the timeline he gave investigators immediately started falling apart, because the more police questioned him, stranger his behavior became. Detectives noticed he rarely showed genuine panic. He didn't seem desperate to find his wife. He wasn't begging for updates. Instead, he focused strangely hard on controlling conversations and explaining details nobody had even asked about. That was the first red flag. Then came the second. Neighbors began reporting unusual smells coming from the property. At first, people ignored it. Maybe spoiled food, trash, plumbing problems. But the odor kept returning. And according to some neighbors, it became unbearable. Police returned to the home. This time, they searched more carefully. And during that search, investigators noticed something odd sitting inside the house. A refrigerator that seemed completely out of place. Not a normal kitchen fridge, a separate unit. Large, unusual. And according to investigators, the husband appeared visibly nervous whenever officers got near it. That single detail changed the entire direction of the investigation. Because now, detectives weren't looking at a missing persons case anymore. They were looking at a potential crime scene. When officers finally opened the refrigerator, the atmosphere inside the house changed instantly. Veteran investigators would later admit the discovery shocked even them. Inside was evidence so disturbing that officers immediately sealed off the property and called homicide detectives to the scene. The woman who had supposedly left had never left at all, and what police discovered next made the case even more horrifying, because this wasn't a sudden act of rage. Investigators believed the husband had been carefully hiding the truth for days, maybe longer. The refrigerator, prosecutors later argued, wasn't just being used to conceal evidence. It had become something far darker, a chamber designed to delay discovery, a cold, silent hiding place sitting inside an ordinary home, while neighbors walked by completely unaware. And somehow, the husband continued living there as though nothing had happened. Eating, sea leafing, talking to people, pretending everything was normal. That psychological detail disturbed investigators almost as much as the crime itself. Because most killers panic, most make mistakes quickly, but according to prosecutors, this man appeared methodical, calm, detached, almost rehearsed. As detectives dug deeper into the marriage, they discovered a relationship filled with manipulation, resentment, and control. Friends later described moments where the husband became possessive and unpredictable. Some recalled arguments that escalated over seemingly minor issues. But nobody expected murder. And definitely not what investigators now believed happened after it. The husband's statements continued changing under questioning. At first, he insisted his wife had walked out voluntarily. Then parts of his timeline stopped matching surveillance footage. Then phone records created even bigger problems. Messages sent from the wife's phone after her disappearance appeared suspiciously staged. Investigators suspected someone was attempting to create the illusion that she was still alive. And every contradiction pushed detectives closer toward one terrifying conclusion. The husband already knew exactly where she was the entire time. Meanwhile, forensic teams processed the refrigerator and surrounding areas inch by inch. Detectives searched for fingerprints, biological evidence, cleaning agents, and signs of a struggle. What they found painted an increasingly grim picture. According to investigators, there were indications the scene had been partially cleaned. But criminals often misunderstand one thing about forensic science. You can wipe surfaces, you can move objects, you can hide bodies, but tiny details almost always survive. And in this case, those tiny details started speaking loudly. Forensic evidence reportedly connected the husband directly to the concealment effort. Detectives also began examining internet activity, timelines, purchases, and behavior before and after the disappearance. What they uncovered made the case feel less like a spontaneous domestic tragedy, rhymed more like a slow psychological collapse happening behind closed doors. The public quickly became obsessed with the story, not just because of the horrifying discovery, because of one chilling question. How long had the husband been living in that house with the refrigerator hiding the truth? days, weeks, and perhaps even more disturbing. How many times had he stood beside investigators pretending to search for a woman he already knew was dead? As media coverage exploded, the husband's calm demeanor became one of the most talked about aspects of the case. In interviews and police interactions, many people noticed the same unsettling pattern. Very little emotion, very little urgency, almost as if he was trying to perform concern instead of actually feeling it. And investigators were beginning to believe they knew why. Because behind the ordinary image of marriage and domestic life, they believed something monstrous had been hiding for a very long time. But the deeper detectives investigated the final days before the wife's death, more disturbing the story became, because according to prosecutors, this case wasn't only about murder, it was about control. And what they discovered next, inside the husband's digital history, financial activity, and private behavior would make the entire case even darker. As investigators dug through the husband's digital history, they began uncovering behavior that painted a deeply disturbing picture behind the marriage. Meech histories, deleted messages, financial records. Tiny fragments of evidence that, piece by piece, started reconstructing what prosecutors believed had really happened inside that house. And according to investigators, the most chilling part wasn't only the murder itself, it was what happened afterward. Because while friends and family were desperately searching for the missing wife, the husband allegedly continued living his life almost normally. Detectives later claimed he attempted to create a fake timeline to distance himself from her disappearance. Certain phone activity appeared staged, conversations felt rehearsed. Even his public reactions started drawing suspicion. People close to the case described something unsettling about him. He never seemed truly shocked, never truly devastated. Instead, prosecutors argued he appeared focused on one thing: control over the narrative, control over the investigation, control over how people perceived him. But the more he tried controlling the story, more cracks began to appear. Forensic analysts reportedly discovered inconsistency between his statements and the physical evidence inside the house. Timelines stopped matching. Movements inside the property became difficult to explain. And once detectives started carefully reconstructing the final hours before the wife vanished, prosecutors believed the truth became unavoidable. This was not a disappearance, this was a cover-up. And the refrigerator sitting inside that home became the most horrifying symbol of it all. To investigators, it represented planning, delay, and emotional detachment so severe that even seasoned detectives struggled processing it. Because, according to prosecutors, the husband had been sleeping, eating, and speaking casually with people while hiding unimaginable horror only feet away. That detail haunted the public. Not because it felt like a movie, not because it didn't. There were no masked intruders, no dramatic chase scenes, no secret criminal empire. Just an ordinary-looking marriage, quietly collapsing into something terrifying behind closed doors. And that reality disturbed people far more. As the case moved forward, investigators continued interviewing friends, neighbors, and relatives. Many began sharing details they once dismissed as relationship problems. controlling behavior, emotional manipulation, arguments that suddenly stopped whenever outsiders appeared. One friend later admitted something chilling. The wife sometimes looked like she wanted to say something, but never did. That sentence stayed with many people following the case, because hindsight changes everything. The small warning signs people ignore at the time suddenly become impossible to forget afterward. Meanwhile, prosecutors prepared to argue that the husband's actions after the killing demonstrated consciousness of guilt. They pointed toward the concealment efforts, inconsistent statements, suspicious behavior, and forensic findings as evidence this was not panic, but deliberate action. The defense, however, attempted to challenge parts of the prosecution's timeline and interpretation of events. They argued investigators were building assumptions around circumstantial evidence and emotional reactions rather than direct proof of intent. But public opinion had already shifted heavily, especially after details from inside the home became public. The refrigerator became the central image people could not stop thinking about. Not just because of what was allegedly hidden inside it, because of what it symbolized psychologically. A cold, mechanical attempt to pause reality itself, to delay consequences, to freeze the truth. And for many people, that was more horrifying than the violence alone. As courtroom proceedings continued, the emotional toll on the victim's family became devastatingly clear. Relatives described sleepless nights, unbearable grief, and the trauma of learning how their loved one had allegedly been treated after death. One family member reportedly said something that silenced the courtroom. "No human being deserves to disappear like that." And suddenly, the case became bigger than headlines and internet fascination. It became about a woman whose final moments end inside a home that should have been safe, a marriage that should have protected her, a person she should have been able to trust. That betrayal sat at the emotional center of the entire case because statistically, some of the most dangerous places for vulnerable victims are not dark alleys or abandoned streets, but their own homes, with people they know, people they love, people the world assumes they are safe with. As prosecutors laid out the timeline, they argued the husband's behavior after the crime revealed more than panic ever could. According to them, the concealment efforts showed calculation, and calculation changes how juries see everything. A sudden argument can feel chaotic, but attempts to hide evidence, to stage timelines, to manipulate perceptions, that feels intentional. And intentional actions are incredibly difficult to explain away. By the time the case reached its later stages, the refrigerator had become infamous online. True crime communities dissected every detail. News channels replayed the story repeatedly. People across the internet kept asking the same disturbing question. How can someone live beside something so horrifying and act normal? But criminologists often point out something uncomfortable about cases like this. Many offenders do not see themselves the way society sees them. Some compartmentalize, some rationalize, some emotionally disconnect entirely. And sometimes, that emotional emptiness becomes more terrifying than visible rage, because rage burns hot, but coldness lingers. Today, the case remains one of the most disturbing domestic crime stories many people have ever heard. not because of elaborate violence or cinematic horror, but because of its realism. An ordinary home, an ordinary marriage, an ordinary appliance sitting quietly in a house. And behind all of it, a reality so disturbing that even detectives struggled to process it. The story became a chilling reminder that some of the darkest crimes don't happen in isolated warehouses or secret underground chambers. Sometimes they happen in kitchens, in bedrooms, in homes where neighbors wave hello every morning. And sometimes the person creating the horror looks completely ordinary until the truth finally forces its way into the light. Because in the end, this case wasn't just about murder. It was about what happens when control, resentment, and emotional detachment slowly transform a relationship into something monstrous. A nightmare hidden inside everyday life. And that's exactly what makes stories like this so terrifying, not because they feel unreal, but because they don't.